Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Aric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3 and I have 3.
My name's Hallie and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter and I love eating.
My name's Chase and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
Welcome to this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. We are super excited this week because it feels like we're going to a new level. We are bringing an actual counselor, someone that might actually be able to help you, not just Angie and I giving you what works for us and what doesn't work, someone that sees it every day. And so Lynn Roush is a LPC, native of Chicago, grew up attending the Moody Church as a pastor's kid. And we've referenced Lynn's blogs several months ago in our podcasts because we have found them to be very helpful. And so we'll post the blogs again, or at least the link to the church website so that you can find them. So Lynn decided after high school that she was going to study psychology and philosophy at Taylor University. And then she pursued an MA in counseling psychology from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, where her coursework, say that 5 times fast, where her coursework included biblical and theological studies in addition to psychological and clinical training. It's where she met her husband, Roush. They married in 1997. I've known Shay now for 13, 14 years. I first met Lynn. And after spending several years raising their 3 children, Lynn started professional counseling ministry at The Crossing, where Angie and I attend. Back in 2006, she started that. But I think what's really important is her passion is to help people understand generational cycles of dysfunction. That could keep us here for weeks, years. Yeah. And work with clients to break destructive patterns in marriages and families. That's the biggest intro we've ever given, but I feel like it's important to say all of those things. And Angie and I are super excited to have you, Lynn. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Where should we start?
I mean, this could go for a really long time. Lynn sent us a bunch of topics and questions that got Angie and I immediately going, we probably should have met with Lynn before we even blended this family. And I think that we have people that are listening that are considering blending family, people that are already in it, and we have traditional families that are also listening that keep saying, hey, I'm finding out things here. And when you're breaking generational cycles, I can see where everybody could use it. So let you start, honey.
Oh, gosh, there's so many things I want to ask.
Okay.
So my first question is, when does it get easier when you're blending families?
Wow, that's a great question. And thanks again, you guys, for having me. I know you personally, but it's fun to just be in this setting and talking about these things. And I just want to tell you guys, first of all, how much I admire you because you guys are opening up a dialogue that I think families, couples really need to have. And in doing so, you're already breaking those generational cycles. So kudos to you guys for digging in and asking hard questions. And thanks for having me be a part of it.
Tear me up a little bit. Thank you.
Really?
Very kind. Yeah, that's super sweet.
No, that truly comes from the bottom of my heart. So I absolutely mean that. I will say that what often happens when couples enter remarriage is there's this ideal expectation, right? They've been through the pain of divorce. They're looking for comfort. They're looking for companionship. They think I finally found a partner that gets me and is going to ease the pain of what I've been through. And yet what the research shows is that for a couple getting remarried, that the level of stress that they experience remains high for at least 5 to 7 years before it ever reaches that of a, quote, normal or just first-time married couple.
Means we got a couple of years to go.
Yeah, how many years are you guys into this at this point?
See, now,
I lost track.
we're about, I don't know, 3. We've been together 3 years roughly, but I would say truly blending probably 2.
2 to 2.5.
But had someone told me that when we first started, hey, you're in it for the long haul, it's going to be about 5 to 7 years before it gets better, I would have been like, holy crap.
Is that because the kids are leaving after 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, right. Kick everybody out. No, and that's really good. And I say that not to discourage people, but to normalize people. So if you are in that situation and you are looking at other couples and thinking, wow, they don't have the juggling act that we have and they don't have these external stressors like we have, that is just simply because the nature of working on blending a family is exponentially more difficult. And the other issue to consider is that the parent-child bond that you have predates this new relationship that you're in. And what that essentially means is that this new coupling, this new marriage is the most vulnerable relationship in the whole home. So just because you fall in love and you think, oh, this person and I finally found someone I'm compatible with, that coupling process is actually separate from the familying process of bringing an entire family together. And if you don't know that going in, you might be very surprised and you might be asking yourself, why isn't it easier yet? And the reality is because the nature of it does not lend itself to being easy. There's a sea of opposition that comes when you're trying to bring people from different backgrounds and different, lifestyles and parenting styles, and also just every member of the family adjusting to what this new family dynamic is going to be.
I feel like especially for the kids, everyone trying to figure out what's my place in this new family. Yes. What's my role supposed to be? Yes. And they're already, a lot of the times, ours going through teenage years where the hormonal things are all over the place anyway. And so now it's like, oh, but I have to find a new place in this family when it might have just been Angie and the 3 kids or me and the 3 kids. They knew what their place was.
Right.
And now we're redoing everything.
Right.
Well, the other thing is, and I'm sure people have shared this too, but I feel like it ebbs and flows too. I feel like when we first started dating, it's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. This is my person, right? And then again, like to your point, then you're like, that's where I want, that's where I want to go. That's a relationship that I want. Everything's working great. Mm-hmm. Then you do start blending the family. And then you're like heads down focused on the kids and how do you bring them together. And then I know we've had ups and downs too, where it's like, we're good. Now we're focusing on the kids. Oh gosh, our relationship's struggling because we haven't paid attention to that. And that for me is such a balancing act to try to focus on your relationship as husband and wife, new husband and wife, but then also how do we blend these kids? And so sometimes it's like, oh, it's going great. And then it's like, whoa, we just took 2 steps backwards.
Right. And again, I think you're saying it very well. That's a very normal experience. And I've heard it said that for a remarried couple, sometimes the honeymoon comes at the end instead of the beginning, just because
that makes sense.
They're so
when they're gone?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Again, Aric, you're really anxious to get the kids out of the house. I hear that.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just hearing it at the end. Okay.
Right. Well, because again, you're out of the gate, the setup of the relationship is immediately more complex. It is more complicated by the fact that you already have bonds with your children, and nobody wants those bonds to disintegrate or become dysfunctional in any way. So you're trying to maintain those bonds with your children, and yet you're trying to create a new bond maybe with a new child in the family. And so inherently that could create jealousy and conflict and confusion as to, like you said, what everybody's role in the family may be.
Yeah, and I think we kind of, looking through some of the things that you had sent us ahead of time, one of the things that I think we have seen and we try to discuss a lot is, we want it to be very positive for all the kids with their other families, right? Because it's always easier if everybody gets along and everyone's doing those things. But inherently, the children still feel sometimes a guilt that, oh, I'm having feelings for this new bonus parent, or I need to really stick up for my other parent in the family because I want to make sure that there's a clear line of delineation or whatever that might be. And so when we talk to other families, we've seen it in cases even in our own home where it's like, it's just a very fine line of a child is really torn sometimes, growing these feelings for a new parent while still feeling okay with their real parent.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I'll speak to that, again, kind of more from a psychological perspective. And that is...
You're the brains. That's what we brought you in.
I'm the brains.
We're just sharing what's happening. You're the brains.
No, thank you. But really it all starts with attachment. Okay, so attachment is a psychological word, but you could also think of just the word trust or bonding. Okay, so the parent-child bond is what the child depends on from birth, right? Because when you're born, you can't meet any of your own needs. You're completely dependent on your parent to step in and meet your emotional, your physical, your mental, all those developmental needs. And so that attachment is going to create a bond between a parent and a child. And it is in a child's nature to be loyal to their parent because the threat of that attachment going away is absolutely terrifying, because that is your source of everything, your source of security, your source of identity, your source of getting those needs met. And so when divorce happens in a family, what it creates for a child is what I would call a double bind. And a double bind is simply where a person is put in a situation where no matter which choice they make, there's going to be a negative outcome. If it's like a lose-lose situation, right? So to your point, if I'm happy to be around my bonus dad, then that inherently means I might be making someone else upset, or vice versa.
We just talked to David Rowe last week, and you know David,
Yes.
and he comes from a blood family. I'm in my 40s, and I still worry about, upsetting one parent and the other parent. And he's like, I have a great relationship with my mom, my bonus mom, my dad, my bonus dad. And I still, in my 40s, worry that I'm upsetting someone when I make a decision.
Yep, yeah, and that's the nature of a double bind. And it really is sort of impossible to erase that. But I do think that some of the things we're going to talk about today, things for parents to keep in mind, strategies that they may be able to use with their children, can help buffer that, is what I would say. You cannot eliminate the nature of the double bind, but you can certainly ameliorate the effects that does, because essentially what that double bind is doing is it's creating dissonance inside a child, right? There's like an inner conflict, like to, David, even though he's an adult, right? He has this inner conflict of, if I spend time with one family, is that going to reflect poorly and someone else be upset with me? So what parents need to understand in this situation is that their child is experiencing, and every child is different, but to some degree, some inner distress and anxiety, probably almost all the time, because of the double bind that they're in. And that is just, part of the nature of this, but it's something to be so aware of, because once you're aware that it's there, now you want to observe your child's behavior. You want to tune in to the little comments that they make. You want to notice, even just by changes in their facial expression and how they, enter the room, like, hey, is something bothering you? Do you have something on your mind? And a lot of times kids feel like, well, I don't want to make it worse for mom and dad, so I don't want to say anything. Mm-hmm. But what we know is that when we have negative or distressing emotions, when we're alone with those feelings, it makes them exponentially worse. They kind of take on a life of their own. So if we don't give those pathways for our kids to really open up and share about how yucky this whole thing makes them feel, then they're going to be alone with those feelings, and then that can mushroom and make things even worse.
Angie says a lot, whether she's saying to me or the kids, like, well, what is the story you're telling yourself right now? Because that's, really, like you said, you in your head, now we're not sharing. Now the story we're telling ourselves is getting exponentially worse, right, when really it may not be everything that we're making it out to be. Yeah.
So how do you create that space to where they do openly share and can talk about it? Because, I think that's, to your point, a struggle with all kids. I see it with my kids, too. When you do know something's bothering them, and it's like, I'm fine, Mom. Yeah. So what are those key things that parents can kind of start implementing to eliminate some of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, I talked a little bit about attachment and secure attachment. So through a lot of the things that we're doing with our kids, we're communicating, my love for you isn't going to change, that there's really nothing you can do that's going to make me love you more or love you less. But I think the emotional relationship with the child depends so much on that attunement. We're kind of like a radio dial that you're turning very finely to tune into those, emotional radio waves, so to speak, that your child is sending out. that takes time, that takes practice, but it also takes the ability to set your own thoughts and feelings aside. And I think one of the hardest things for any parent to do, no matter what, is to suspend their own thoughts and feelings to allow space for the child to have their own thoughts and feelings. I'm guilty of this all the time. I'm like, I don't want to hear it because I'm right, my kids, right? So it's like, God bless them. They're probably like, yeah, it is so hard because, and here's what I just know for myself, and I think parents in general, is that's because we're scared about what they might say. I'm scared if I open that door, truly, not just like, oh, what's on your mind, but truly slow down, pay attention, and ask that question. How is my behavior impacting you? How is this situation impacting you? And not project your own feelings onto them, but truly listen is one of the most difficult things that a parent can do, especially when you may feel a measure of guilt or culpability that, hey, I might have been the one to cause this pain on some level. It's like, we don't want to hear that. That's going to really hurt.
Gosh, it's so true. And I do think as parents, especially, being divorced and starting a new sort of home, I feel like a big fear is they're not going to want to be here. You know what I mean? They're going to want to go to the other parent's house type of thing. I feel that with even the other parents, right? I feel like, so you have this whole group of these parents that all have that same fear of what if I don't have the cool house or the fun house, or maybe they're not getting along with their stepbrother and they don't like being here. To your point, I think when you know something's bothering your kids and you ask them, that's a fear that if you really dig deep, they're not happy. And that, we are all responsible for a divorce. It takes two, right? So there is, I will tell you, there's a ton of guilt of divorce and kids having to go through that. And you do feel like, I caused this. This is why they're having a struggle. So
here's the counterintuitive angle of all of this, though. It's not that pain that's going to hurt your child. Emotional pain is not necessarily going to damage your child. What damages your child is having no space to talk about it.
Yeah. Gosh, that's
really
so
good.
And
true.
no way to process it. So it's counterintuitive in that by opening that door that feels really scary, that's actually what's going to want them to stay, because that's where the attachment and the attunement and the connection is going to pay off big time. But we have to get over our own fears of what might their answer be. And I will tell you, I've met with many people, I've worked with many people who are adult children of divorce as they process these things. And I'll ask them sometimes, did either of your parents ever just sit down with you and look you in the eye and say, how has this divorce impacted you? And really wanted an honest answer. And I'll tell you, it's rare that I would have a client say, yeah, I've had that conversation with my mom or with my dad. And I just think, and one woman in particular said, if one of my parents actually sat me down and asked that question, she said, first of all, I think I'd pass out because I'd be so like completely shocked that they would ask that. Secondly, she said, I wouldn't even know what to say or where to begin because there's just so much there. But then the third thing she said was, as she kind of sat with that for a minute, she said, honestly, I don't even know that I would need to say all the things. Just them asking me that question would mean so much. So just asking the question can open your child's heart in a way that maybe it's not been open before.
Yeah, and hearing you say that, it's so scary, right? Even oh gosh, I'm a pretty open person, don't mind us, but it's like, oh, you want me to ask that and feel the hurt that I've caused my kids in certain ways? But I see what you're saying. They don't even have to answer. Some may not. Mm-hmm. But it's going to give another opportunity for them to grow in trust of, okay, dad or mom recognizes that there's a pain point. Absolutely. And they're not ignoring it. They're not just shining over it and making
denial.
No denial here. But wow, that's interesting. And kind of scary all at once. Like, probably should address at some point.
Well, and I would say, like early on when right after I got divorced, I would say in my mind, I wouldn't want to ask that question because you just don't want them to relive painful. So I think a lot of people probably think that too. Like, well, I don't want to stir it up. Let's just go have fun and let's just make great memories. You know what I mean? Versus really digging deep. I mean, I've gotten that feedback from Hallie, my oldest, but she was like 12, 13. And we just kept on rolling through life, not really sitting in the pain.
And here's the reality. Until you can touch that hurt that they experience, it doesn't go away, right? So the denial, it sort of encapsulates you for a bit, like it buffers you for a bit, but it doesn't, if we try to split it off and cut it off, it's going to work itself out in other ways. Those feelings are going to come out in other ways. And so be the parent is what I would encourage, as we're talking to your listeners. Be the parent that is worthy of your child's trust, worthy of what is in their heart and the tender innocence that may have been, hurt or broken or shattered. If you can be the parent that can hear that and sit with that, as hard as that may be for you, then you're building a pathway for your child to know experientially what it means for me to trust my heart to another person, even if it's been wounded. And that's where the breaking of the cycle occurs. Because if they never relearn that or have that repaired, I think one of the questions you wanted to, address here is, what is one of the biggest, fallouts, from divorce in a child? And my answer would be is broken trust and that broken sense of security. So then the question is, how do we rebuild those pathways in the brain for that child to realize, no, I can have emotional closeness with another person. And that is the job of the parent, to be that safe person, that trustworthy person for them to open up to.
We've said, we wonder what'll happen with our kids' relationships moving forward, because we, neither Angie nor myself come from a divorced home. Our parents were married. So this is new for us. This is new for our kids. What does that mean for them then when they go into a relationship? But it sounds like what you're saying is, if we're able to address the trust issues, that's going to go a long way in what happens in their relationships moving forward. Am I hearing that right?
That's my assertion, because trust is absolutely core and central to any healthy relationship. You cannot have a healthy relationship without trust, right?
Fair, yeah, for sure.
And here's the thing about trust. Trust is very fragile and it is easily broken. It doesn't take much to shatter trust, but it takes a lot of effort to build trust, to hold on to trust, to maintain trust in a relationship. So it's not impossible to rebuild, but anytime we move from something that's broken to try to make it whole again, takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy. It is so much easier to stay in that broken place because it's familiar and we want homeostasis. But if we're going to move towards health and wholeness and rebuilding, it's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take being uncomfortable to rebuild that.
The picture in my mind I'm getting as you describe trust and how easy it is to break and how hard it is to build is the scene from A Christmas Story with the electric leg lamp.
Oh, yeah.
And she breaks it and he tries to put it back together. And it's so many little pieces and he spends all this time and then it immediately breaks back again because it's so hard. Once you've broken what that looks like, it is so hard to put it back together. It looked like he could put it back together, but then it was even more fragile and it just broke again. And that's really part of rebuilding trust is, as you're doing it, it can easily break again. Because it's so hard to repair.
Yes, it is hard to repair. However, what we do understand from the research and how relationships function and our need for emotional connection is that relational rupture is normal, right? That happens in every relationship. What is not always normal and common is the repair. Usually we just let that rupture go and we don't really address it. We don't really make the effort to fix it. So when rupture happens and then we work to repair it, that bond can actually be stronger with your child. So whereas you're saying like, oh, I feel so much guilt and oh, it's, so awful, so terrible. If you can work to repair, that bond can actually be stronger because now the child knows, man, even in like the worst of situations, my mom or my dad showed up and they were willing to engage with me and have those hard conversations. So again, I want to move people forward and encourage them that process of rupture and repair can actually form a deeper bond with your child. So we really, like in the parenting class we teach, we really talk about there is no perfect parent and you just have to be a good enough parent. And if you can do some basic things consistently over the long haul, then chances are you're going to have a relatively, emotionally adjusted child. And I would say that's true whether it's, in a blended family or not.
I think we all at some point, whether you've gone through a divorce or not, you lose trust with your kids. Like something happens, right, to break the trust. Yeah. What's like that number one thing for a parent to do to start rebuilding trust? Mm-hmm. I'm looking for the easy button.
I know. It's like, well...
What's the magic pill, Lynn?
Yeah,
Where's that weight loss pill that everybody's searching for? The fountain of youth? What's that pill?
And maybe it's not even with kids. I mean, it could be relationships. It could be between a step parent, step parent, step kid type of thing.
Right. I would say, I don't know if this is going to give you what you're looking for here, but I would say at the core, what trust is built on is the idea that the other person gets, and I'm using air quotes and you can't see me, but I'm like, that they get the impact that they have on you. If someone doesn't get the impact that they have on you, you really can't trust them, right? Like if they don't get it. So again, it goes back to opening that door of, hey, how did you experience me in that? Did what I say or how you reacted make you want to move closer to me, or did it push you away? Because until I get it, why is anybody going to trust me? Because what's going to happen? I'm going to do it again. I'm going to hurt you again. So it really is, again, back to that communication of, hey, I want to get the impact that I have on you. And so much of that, I think, in parenting is we have to be willing, and this is so, so hard. Like I'm squeezing my brain right now because it's hard for everyone, but is to really engage with your child on the level of, I want to be able to take your perspective. I want to be able to set my perspective aside and enter into what is it like to be you? What is it like to be a child in this family? What is it like to have me as your mother? What is it like to have the siblings that you have? What is it like? Because if I'm not willing to kind of get in there and figure out what is it like to be you, I'm not going to get you on a deep level. You're not going to trust me on a deep level. And we're just going to kind of continue on in whatever the pattern is. And that's just going to repeat itself many times over.
It's getting deep in here.
Oh,
it's
no.
getting scary.
So in that, I'm going to get really tactical here, but like in the discussion with your kid, when you're asking them those particular questions, I assume you're more listening to what they're saying. Because I also think in just life in general, we are always listening to formulate a response, like to say, oh, but here, and I am so guilty of like positive vibes, right? So if someone shares, a concern or, then it's like you try to
want to fix it,
right?
Yeah.
That's how I'm wired. So it's like, okay, well, then here's all the positives. So does that negate the child sharing, this is my experience, when you're trying to share, then you turn around and share a positive with them? Or is it more just listening to understand versus to respond?
Yeah, I think you kind of answered your own question there.
I think I do know the answer. Dang it.
You do know the answer. It's
I'd
just
rather
really,
do positive
really
vibes.
hard. Yeah, were you going to say something?
It reminds me, we had a sermon earlier this summer at church about how it's okay to be sad. It's okay to sit in the sadness. We don't have to fix, a lot of times it's actually worse when you have the, well, but I'm going to fix it attitude.
Here's
as
why
a
you
Christian.
shouldn't be
Here's
feeling
why you
this
shouldn't.
way.
You have Jesus.
Or please stop feeling this way.
Rather than sometimes it's okay to sit in the sadness with our kids, to let them go through that emotional. But we struggle with that, right? Because we don't want them to be sad.
Right.
So at that point, it's like for the parents, we have to learn to be there, but sit with them in the...
Absolutely. And thank you for that segue, because here's what I will also say. There is so much loss that occurs when a family goes through a divorce. And so every member of the family is experiencing loss on some level. And loss is not just a one-time event. Loss is like, an earthquake that happens, and then there's these after effects that show up, right, with your friend David, 40 years later, that he's, or, just even as a child projects into the future, like, okay, what is a graduation going to look like? What is a wedding going to look like? Who's going to walk me down the aisle? When we have grandchildren, what is that? So there's just this aftershock that you have to deal with. And so the way I describe grief to my clients is like two rivers that are coming together, and they're merging at a certain point where there's all this turbulence. And one of those rivers is sadness, and the other river is anger. Okay? And the river of sadness is essentially, I've lost something that I can never get back. Right? And you feel the hurt behind that. You feel the weight of that. But the anger piece is a protest that says, this is not how this should be. Something is wrong here. This isn't how life was designed to go, right? We've moved against the grain, and that hurts. So when we're grieving, we're essentially letting ourselves feel sadness and anger, which I think are two of the most tricky feelings that nobody ever really wants to feel. We brush over it, we bury it, we fix it, we skip over it, But if we can give space to ourselves and to our kids to name how sad they are, that, that family that I really longed for is never going to be. And to be able to put words to that, and for a parent to hear that and feel that with them and go, I get that. That hurts me too. I long for that too. And I so wish that could have happened. So there's the sadness, but then allowing the anger, the natural, God, allows those feelings of anger, not allows, but he created us to feel that. Anger is anger helps us put boundaries around things and to protect what's good and to protest what's bad. So anger is such a critical emotion for us to be able to name and understand and experience and identify, because without it, we're kind of boundaryless, right? It's just things are going in, things are going out. We don't know what's good. We don't know what's bad. And so for an anger to say, for a child to say, I'm really angry about this, is actually such an important part of grieving and healing. But again, what parent wants to sit and hear their child's anger? That feels very scary. We get defensive. We want to fix it. We want to go, but you shouldn't feel that way, because look at all the good things that are going on in your life over here. Like, we just don't want to deal with it.
We live in Missouri. We have people listen to the podcast all over the country. In Missouri, you would take float trips, and Lynn and Angie and I have all been on a float trip. This river of sadness with anger does not seem like a river I want to float. All right, that's all I'm going to say. Seems like one, you're going to tip everything over, you're going to spill. Yeah, but you do. I get exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
It's. And the anger part is so important, right? Because until it feels like to me always like until you get the anger out, you can't actually then rebuild. Is that fair? Or, it just feels like there's a certain amount of anger that's got to be released.
Yeah, I think it's anger, like I said, is a natural response to, we live in a broken world where life does not go the way God designed it to go, because it's infected with this sin virus, and that taints absolutely everything. And so anger is going to be a natural response to that. But the great thing is that if we can grieve losses, like the loss of that ideal family that we thought we were going to have, the loss of maybe more control over our kids because now they're maybe with this other person half the time and I don't see them and I don't know what's going on. If we can grieve those losses, we will be able to move forward. We're not going to be stuck but it doesn't feel good, but we're going to be able to move forward. And so with grief comes growth. So we need to grieve. It's healthy to do that. In fact, that is God's prescribed way for us to live in a broken world, is to grieve, to lament, to name the things that aren't going right, to name the hurt that comes with that, to identify the unmet longings, the unmet needs, the hopes and dreams that maybe were shattered against, the rock of reality. He invites us to bring those questions and those concerns. And I speaking of just the spiritual aspect of things as well, is that only God can be God for our kids. We can't be God for our kids. We try, right? We want to manage and control and protect and all the things. But this is really an opportunity for a child to bring their heart to the Lord, right? And to receive from Him what we as parents cannot, humanly speaking, give to them. So there's opportunities all the way around for trusting God in those situations.
So many really good things that you've said there from grief. You have to grieve to have growth, opportunities for our kids to grow in their relationship with Christ. And it's really, for me, there's some scary things we're talking about, but also really motivational and inspirational things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was getting a little teary-eyed when you're talking, because you're talking about grief. We talk about the kids a lot, but I would say, like, as a mom, anytime my kids are not here, it sucks. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's also like a grieving process too. It's like there's a hole. I tell my kids that all the time. I don't know if I should say that to them or not, because then I'm like, does that make them feel bad? But it's like, I always want you here. Like, that's hard for me to not have you guys. Yeah. So that's also, yeah.
And that's important to grieve. And it's important to name that. And I appreciate you saying that, because I can imagine.
Get teary-eyed.
Yeah.
And she doesn't cry. When she cries, it's like it's a big ordeal.
Well, tears are healing. Yeah. So let the tears come. But this is such an important point. And this is why you're doing this, right? Because you want your listeners to hear, and they are hearing, that you've lost time with your kids that you can never get back. And that feels so hard, because your mother's heart, right? Because you're such a good mother, your mother's heart is where you naturally want your kids to be near you. And that is a God-given, beautiful desire that you have for them. And so to be able to say that out loud, I think moves you to a place of just naming maybe losses that you need to name in order to keep moving forward.
And I would say it does not get easier either.
I'm sure it doesn't.
It's been 6 years.
Yeah.
This is where we sit with you in your sadness, honey. This is where we sit in the grief and we let it go.
No,
in a positive way.
This is it. This is it right here. And I wish people could see, like, just the tenderness, in your soul here, and you being vulnerable with me. And I really, really appreciate that. And again, that's why I admire you, because it's in the not talking about it that you feel alone, and that you question everything, and that, your brain probably goes, every which direction. And so I just want to normalize you that those are feelings that I think a lot of people are experiencing in your situation. Yeah.
This is a great conversation. We are way over on time, but I think Angie and I kind of knew going into this is going to be probably our first ever to be continued episode, because we still have a lot of topics to cover with Lynn. And now that Angie's,
I need to regroup.
And
we need some Kleenex in here.
Now that Angie's got to regroup, we also have to figure out how much we owe Lynn for this session, apparently. So that's where we're at. Right. So we appreciate all of you listening today, and we can tell you right now that next week will be part 2 of our interview with Lynn Roush. So thank you. Have a wonderful week, and God bless. Thank you for listening to Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.